Hope changes everything. The Hope Scholarship at Rhode Island College is the best, most affordable way for Rhode Islanders to earn a bachelor's degree in more than 70 different majors. It's a high quality 4-year degree with the last 2 years tuition free. That's right, the full college experience for half the price, with new in demand majors in cybersecurity, sports management, and biotechnology, and starting next fall, AI. Learn more at ric.edu/hope.
All right. We are up and running. So Jen, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. And I know that we have a lot that we're going to talk about today, but I really wanted to start off by talking to you as somebody who is an LMHC or licensed mental health counselor and has been for a decade now. Let's start out with just in the last 10 years, how much has changed when it comes to mental health?
Yeah, I think you're seeing an entire generation of kids who are now like your Gen Z, your Gen Alphas, who are maybe in high school now or in college, but they were being raised by either your Gen Xers or your millennials. We're seeing an entire generation of kids, like adolescents or early adults, who are proactively going to therapy. Where
Amazing.
I don't think that. Yeah, amazing. I think 10 years ago, we're seeing people go to therapy because there was something wrong or someone told them they needed to go. And now you're seeing this entire generation who I think was raised by people who are a little more exposed to the concept of mental health, the concept of therapy, who are coming proactively. And they're telling, we're saying like, why are you coming to therapy? Why? I always say to everyone, why are you on my couch?
Yeah, of
what
course.
brought you to my
Yeah.
And I've got all teens and early 20s who are saying like, I don't know, I just need a therapist. I want a therapist. So if something happens in my life, inevitably, I have a therapist.
Okay.
So we're seeing where every other concept of health, think about how proactive it is, right? Like you see your primary care every year. You see your dentist twice a year. People even go to chiropractors proactively, right?
Yes.
Mental health wasn't that. Mental health was this, go when something is wrong. And we know that when you see a provider for anything when something is wrong, you'll find something wrong, right? If you go proactive, I think we've got this entire approach where people are developing coping skills. They know how to handle things. It just looks different. So we've got people who are prioritizing their mental health, where I think 10 years ago, we weren't quite seeing the prioritization that we're seeing now.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I mean, I think that we're really in a wonderful spot where we can kind of see that blossom and grow. And I love that you talk about it as proactive care, because that is definitely something that is changing. That was a really great point. And I love that you also note that, if you're looking for something, then you're like, oh, wait, maybe this is something that we can talk about. Because I also think it's so funny. Like we could get in our soapbox, of course, and talk about, insurance companies and all that good stuff where they're like, well, no, there has to be something and yada, yada, yada. But there always is. And honestly, it's funny, in school, we call them like unicorn patients, like those that are like, you know what, I really just truly want to like work on like being a better person. And isn't there always something?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like when we talk about insurance, right, insurance requires that we diagnose you. I cannot bill insurance if we don't give a diagnosis, right?
I know.
But there's this thing called disorder that I'm sure you're very familiar with. But we diagnose adjustment disorder just means a person is struggling to adjust to something. And that could be learning to date. That could be going through a breakup. That could be getting fired from your job for the first time or experiencing work stress, right? We've got these entire generations. When we look at my parents' generation, for example, my dad just retired. He was a company man because that was the generation. The generation was you stayed at the company forever.
Forever.
It didn't matter if you were. You actually didn't ask people if they were happy because. And now you've got people that are bouncing because they're prioritizing their mental health. And I think it's. So when we look at whether or not you're adjusting to something, right, this is kind of this like Hail Mary diagnosis that we can give to people. But I think this idea that like there's always something. And I think even when we look at influx in anxiety, you don't have to be crippled by anxiety to go to therapy for anxiety, right? A lot of us don't have we live in a world which creates anxiety for us. right?
Mm.
And we are a lot more exposed. Our generation, when I was in high school, I had to work to connect with people after school, right?
Yes.
Like
Yep.
I had to go hang out at the Swansea Mall, or I had to do to get on my AOL and fight my brother for the computer. Otherwise, I was like pretty protected.
Yep.
The world's not protected like that anymore. People are
No.
exposed. So anxiety rates are higher. Algorithms support videos that you watch over and over again. So people have more anxieties because they think things are more prevalent than they are.
Of course.
So I think like there's always something because we're now exposed to so much more.
Oh, it's so, I mean, that is such an important aspect of talking about overstimulation too, especially for young kids. It's absolutely, I mean, and that is something actually that I have on my list to do a whole episode about. But it is insane the amount of information that's out there that our brains are just not meant to be absorbing all of this information 24 hours a day. It's like,
Right.
and you know, I come from a decade where I was in news for a decade, and one of the things that we learn in school is, you know, when they made that shift to, you know, if you missed that 6 o'clock news way back in the day and you missed that 3 minutes of weather, you know, you were screwed. That was it. But now you have networks that are 24 hours. Well, when you're sitting there in front of a 24-hour news cycle and you're taking all of that in. And it's interesting because I use that to equate it to like, the TikToks, the Instagrams, because it's all consumer based, right? So if people want to follow certain things, they will. And then the algorithms will show them those certain things. So it just perpetuates, it just perpetuates anxiety. And if you hear things knocking, that's my cats just swatting.
Well, we welcome animals. So I've seen thousands of pets since COVID. Now that we're doing telehealth, like the amount of people who bring their pets to therapy now.
I know.
But people are just inundated, I think, with all this information. People come to me all the time. They say my brain's never quiet. Well, because the world's not quiet. Your life's not quiet. Like,
yeah.
You have to turn off the TV. You have to not use certain apps. You have to like mute your text messages. And that's hard for people. And if you are a millennial, you have the urge to immediately respond to every text message.
Mm-hmm.
About Gen Z and Gen Alpha, I have a handful that work for me either at my practice or a handful. I have two that actually nanny for me. And what I've is their phones are always on Do Not Disturb. So I have like 4 of them. So I asked the 4 of my, Gen Zers, I said, why is your phone always on Do Not Disturb? And they all answered me the same relatively. They said, I'll get to my text messages when I get to them. That is so healthy.
Wow.
And it's this entire generation. Then I started telling people and they said, oh, you're right. My daughter is like 22 and she keeps her messages muted. It's brilliant. So they're onto something. This concept of you don't have to be continually inundated. You get to choose when and which information is coming in because your wellness matters.
That's incredible. Maybe I should try that because I am definitely one of those people that
Same.
I'm like, I actively have to think about not responding right away.
Right. Getting right.
Yeah, literally. Or, you wait for the bubbles, you send something, and then you're like, and I don't know if that comes from like us being the generation that text came out, you know what I mean? So like when we sent something, we'd be like, oh my God, like, are they going to text back? Like,
I think that, Messenger used to have that sound of the door opening and closing. And if you didn't get to someone before their door closed, so there's like imminence of if you didn't respond, that door was closed and that was it. If it was the guy you in high school, forget it. It was over.
It. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, you were waiting. You were waiting for that. Oh my gosh. Wow. Flashbacks. Good times. That's great. So Jen, I know that you own your own practice, and one of the things that we had talked about is one of what we call modalities in therapy that you work with is DBT, which is dialectic behavioral therapy. Now, a lot of people have not heard of that. A lot of people have heard of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Can you, in a nutshell, just kind of tell people what makes that different and what makes that your choice?
Yeah, so DBT is skill-based, which is actually why I like it. I started my career prior to being in private practice. I worked in the prison areas while I was going through grad school or while I was pre-licensed. And I did a lot of DBT because it was skill-based. And I love a skill-based therapy because I'm not really a homework therapist, but I love to give you something during session that you can take and apply throughout the week, right? So I won't really give you a worksheet, but I will give you a skill. The concept of dialectics is this idea that like two things can be true at the same time. My perspective and your perspective can both be true at the same time. And I have to find the between the two of us so that you and I continue to communicate and have some sort of a relationship.
Yeah.
And or I have to find out the truth with which what's really going on in my reality versus how I'm perceiving it. So a safe place between that so that I can process that and move forward. So dialectics is really just the concept of like everything you think, perceive, and everything everyone else thinks and perceives can also all be true. There isn't one finite truth when it comes to perception and memory and recollection. And that's not really how it works. So really focused on skill-based. How do you take care of you? How do you take care of your relationships? How do you make sure you are well so that your relationships are well? It was originally designed for individuals with borderline personality disorder, but now we're seeing it kind of extended to all populations. And I usually will plug it into my sessions. So if somebody is working on a module of DBT is distress tolerance. So if someone does not tolerate distress well, right? So if they're saying like, I don't get out of bed for 3 days, or I immediately disengage with my friendships when I'm upset, or I eat for 2 days, we kind of engage in distress tolerance. Like, okay, what are some skills so that you can learn to tolerate stress a little more easily and a little more safely so that you're not damaging relationships, you're not engaging in compulsive behaviors. And sometimes my clients are very aware that that's what they're doing. They'll come to me and they'll request DBT. And sometimes we're just kind of working it into session. And I think most people love a skill. They love to leave therapy feeling like they came for something and they left with something. So that's why. And I think you can kind of apply.
I love that. I really love that. And I think that it's really important because there are a lot of people that are like not so much into homework. And if we think about, you know, CBT at its core, a lot of the time it is homework. And I think it's interesting to talk about DBT as well, because I have seen it pop up on the internet a little bit. People are really starting to, I think, dive into a little bit more education around, you know, what types of skills do the therapist that they're working with hold, and what modalities do they use. Like I've seen things online where people are saying, you know, I'm looking for a person-centered therapist. Do they really know what that means? You know, I always question that, of course, but that's why I kind of wanted to break that down, because I think that's really important. And DBT is actually something that I really like. I think that that's super helpful. I think it's super helpful for me as well. Like I always liked that. I never really was like, I like to journal sometimes, but I like an active, I'm a task oriented person. So, I really find that helpful. So thank you for breaking that down, for our listeners, just to kind of like understand what that is. And, I'm so interested that you had worked in, the prison, and now something that you're working on is working with first responders. So I want to say thank you, because it really seems that you're always, you know, doing something to work with populations that really need that. And I think that that speaks to your character, and I think that's beautiful. So we had touched base upon this a little bit when I had reached out to you, just about you working with specifically firefighters. So I want to open the door to you to kind of tell us what you're doing. And, you know, it's pretty big.
Yeah. To lean off, I think, that proactive treatment. So there's a program rolling out that I'm going to start doing. I did a pilot with 4 departments. We're going to add 16 more departments over the next 2 years of proactive treatment. So we're going to work with firefighters. And if you know firefighters in your life, they are my absolute favorite population to work with, because they are wildly irreverent. They make the entire time we're working together. But they always circle back. So you've got this population of people who are continually exposed to trauma. And here's the thing about trauma. Not only are you never supposed to be exposed to it, you're not supposed to be exposed to it continually, constantly. And the number one reason that first responders typically seek therapy is incidents involving animals and kids. And we call that the innocence factor. right? I think when people go through the fire academy or the police academy, they are very much aware of certain things they're going to encounter, right? Like there's going to be fires. I'm going to run into a building on fire. They're maybe not ready for that car accident where something horrific happens to a child, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing this proactive treatment where we were going out and we are saying, when there's cumulative trauma,
Mm-hmm.
here is how it changes your brain, and here is what you need to look for.
Yes.
And firefighters are really big on taking care of each other. They're helpers by nature, right? They're not great on taking care of themselves, just like a lot of other helping professions aren't.
Yeah.
So training really is, what do you look for in the people you work with? How do you help people that you spend most of your lives with? How do you help them?
Huge.
And what we find is that they end up referring each other to treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So we start talking about, like, this is how trauma impacts your brain. This is what it looks like in behavior. This is how it's affecting your life. Like the average population over the age of 22, 17% are binge drinkers. When you look at fire age of 22, 56% are binge drinkers.
Wow.
So we know that trauma is impacting firefighters. We know that it's become culturally acceptable to just drink more, but really what we're doing is treating trauma, right? We're just now
self-medicating. Yeah, of course.
Out at the bar after work. It's like, we're right. Cool. You can hang out at the bar, but can you go to the bar after you go to your therapy session? Mm-hmm. So I think that I'm not trying to remake the wheel. I'm not trying to change the firefighter culture. I'm trying to add something to it.
Of course.
If you're good at taking care of other people and you're so good at looking out for each other, you cannot do that if your cup is empty. You cannot do that if you are not well. You cannot do that if you are crippled by trauma. So you are experiencing PTSD, anxiety, depression. Your relationships are falling apart. The substance use is increasing. Suicide is obviously a huge component of being a firefighter. We know that firefighters, even in our state, die all the time by suicide. And that is the reality of the situation. And there's only so much trauma we can put on an individual before we have to really step back and say, it's not an occupational hazard. It shouldn't be an occupational hazard. It should be something that we are teaching people how to handle, because it's impacting lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought up suicide, because it's something that I feel like it is shied away from talking about so often, because it's that, oh, if you ask someone if they've thought about suicide, you're going to cause it. It's that, and we know scientifically that's not accurate. That is not what happens. In fact, it's the actual opposite. If you're asking somebody and they want to talk about it, you are preventing, you are helping that situation. So thank you for sharing that startling statistic. And first responders, often, it's interesting. I heard you refer to it as firefighter culture, which is very interesting to me, because the way I think about it is, we think about culture and everything that you said, definitely with the military, but I also think that first responders, police officers, firefighters, they also have their own culture. And I equate it to the military in the sense that they are looking out for everybody else, but when it comes to themselves, they're like, oh, I'm fine.
Right.
I don't need that. And that can be such a conundrum, because they're helpers at heart, but they're not looking out for themselves. So it's important that they look out for their brothers and sisters in whatever capacity that may be. So what are some things that they should be looking for, first responders in general, or family members of first responders, family members, friends? What should they be looking for to say, you know what, maybe it's time that I broach that topic, that they might need more professional help?
Sure. We always want to look at someone's change from baseline. Your baseline matters, right? So if you have always been sort of crotchety and you don't really socialize at work, and you're still kind of crotchety and you don't really socialize at work, I call that the Eeyore syndrome. Like, that's fine. That's who you are. If you are at every meal, if you are working out with the group, if you are in everybody's business, and all of a sudden people are having a hard time finding you, they have to look for you in the station, right? They have to seek you out when there's mealtime. I'm worried about that person, because I have questions about why their baseline changed. I'm worried about anybody who has changes for 30 days, right? So we know that acute stress disorder happens within 30 days. Acute stress disorder happens to a lot of us. A lot of times it kind of dissolves on its own. Acute stress disorder is the predecessor to PTSD.
Yes.
And We know that a lot of times it resolves on its own, but sometimes it doesn't. So anything after 30 days. I'm looking at sleep changes. Are you sleeping more, sleeping less? Appetite changes. Eating more, eating less. That kind of stuff matters. Isolation. I'm really worried about isolation. I'm really worried about snapping at your kids more, which is usually when spouses send first responders into therapy. That's where snapping at your kids more are things that typically weren't causing you as much irritability, now, increasing your irritability. And so I think just looking for when someone feels different. And here's the thing about suicide. I ask people every day if they're thinking about taking their own lives, right? It's part of our intake process. It's something that we ask all the time. You get very used to it as a therapist. And here's something you learn. Some people will wait for the opportunity to tell someone they need help, and they will internally tell themselves, if no one cares about me, nobody will ask. Prove them wrong. So I would somebody a little uncomfortable. Although I will tell you, I've never had anyone, and I've asked probably thousands of people at this point if they're thinking about hurting themselves. I've never had anyone outwardly express anger towards that question. Maybe they go in the car and they talk about me in the parking lot. I don't know. They to me. I have had lots of people say, now that you ask, tell me something that allows me to intervene and help.
Yep.
So I would rather someone be upset at me for thinking I'm nosy, for thinking I'm over-involved, than for me to be sitting at someone's funeral saying, I wish I had said something. Because I'll tell you, when we debrief with family members or coworkers after there is a death by suicide, there's always someone in the room who says, I knew something was wrong and I didn't know what to do, or I was afraid to say something. That is a super common thing that we hear. So I'd rather people be upset with me for thinking I'm nosy. And I am nosy, let's be honest. Like, I don't know for you, but like, I get everyone's business. Like, I'm the nosiest person alive, right?
That's why you're a good therapist.
Right. I am nosy. So I will ask you, I don't care. But I think, like, I would rather people be upset for that reason. They'll be alive.
Yeah.
And not be angry with me and not be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And going back to that, profession and culture of being a helper and reaching out maybe to the people that you work with, but not thinking that you need it yourself. If there are first responders that are listening to this that are hesitant, I know that their job security is something that's always something that comes up. Like, well, what if they tell me like I'm not mentally fit to work right now, and then I can't provide for my family, or they're going to take me away from my kids, or so. I kind of want to dispel and use some education to help those that might be listening on what actually happens and what they don't need to. They have enough they're going through. You don't have to add to that anxiety. So, what can you tell us about that?
So we are protected by HIPAA, just like every other medical professional, right? So it's a federal offense for us to share, even that you have called our office. So not only the information you share with us, but once you call, the way HIPAA works is once you call a medical office and you give your name, you are now protected. No one can even know that you called. And the CARES Act came out a few years ago. Psychotherapy actually had more protection than every other specialty. So we can't tell anything. And I'm going to be honest with you, Lindsay, like, I have very little skills outside of this. So like, I'm not looking to lose my job or my license, because what would I do? Like, I really have no other skills. So
I feel that. Yep.
My life, even if I were a horrible person, I still need to pay my mortgage, right?
Understandable.
So there is a federal law that protects people. We cannot even tell people you called, even if you are thinking about ending your life. So here's the only way your job would know is if you, one, told them.
Okay.
Or two, if for some reason anyone ever got a hold of your insurance, because there are insurance remittances that will say you went for therapy. They will not say what you went for. So you could easily say, like, I went to talk about my spouse, or I went to talk about my neighbor who has a tree that really annoys me. That comes up in therapy a lot, for the record.
I was going to say, it's funny that you say that because it's not as strange as it sounds. Property line is a hot topic.
So I think there's this, you are protected as much as you need to be protected. I see plenty of responders who are afraid of the insurance component, so they choose to pay out of pocket. We have a first responder rate, actually, for that reason. I actually don't know how true it is that insurance would get in the way. However, I can't speak to that. So sometimes people will say, can I forego my insurance because I'm worried about leaving that paper trail on my insurance?
Yeah.
Sure. So you're as protected as you want to be. I'm not approaching you in a grocery store, and I always tell people in intake, if you ever see me in public, I ignore you unless you say hi to me. And I see people everywhere.
Yeah, of
right?
course.
Small state. And people, there's two types of people: the people who run up to me and introduce me to their entire family, or the people that roll behind into the next aisle, right?
Yep.
So like, we're as protected as you want to be. We're not sharing your information. I'm not telling other people that I know you. We can't. I cannot federally do that. And lots of therapists have lost their licenses for just that.
Yeah.
So we're not doing it. It's not happening.
Yeah, absolutely. That was really well said. Thank you so much. Jen, you have been an absolute pleasure and a wealth of knowledge to have on this podcast. Thank you so much. Before I let you go, just share with our viewers, because I know that you do have your own practice, and I believe you are taking, you're accepting new clients right now. Maybe not you, but I know other people in your practice are. So how can people follow you, and how can people reach out to your practice?
The name of the practice is Polaris Counseling. We're in both North Providence and Smithfield. We do telehealth as well. I have 10 clinicians who work for me right now. So we're accepting most major insurances, out-of-pocket rates. I'm accepting a few people. All of my clinicians' caseloads are open. And you can always call the office. The office is 401-349-4269.
Perfect. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I know that you mentioned that there's a first responder rate, and I'm hoping that somebody listens to this podcast and thinks, you know what, like maybe it is time that's the whole point of this podcast is, mental health education, and to hopefully, get those people the help that they need, because as we talked about, not everybody is Gen Z and Gen Alpha, right? That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lindsay.